Ya bize de
Evet.
kanka sesin
Sayın hocalarım, sevgili arkadaşlar, sevgili öğrencilerimiz merhaba. Şimdi şöyle bir sorunumuz var. Maalesef Filistin'de ve İsrail'de yani Kudüs'te ve Ramallah'ta bu sene baş gösteren bir saat dilimi sorunu var. Ramallah tarafı yani 11 gözüküyor. 11 saatini şu an itibariyle 11-14'ü gösteriyor Ramallah'ta. Kudüs'te saat 12-14. Bu saat karışıklığından dolayı Pelin hocamız yani konuşmacıyla bağlantı kuran Pelin hocamız da bu durumu bilmediği için konuşmacı da bize bu durumu bildirmediği için böyle bir sıkıntı oluştu. Şu anda konuşmacımız yolda bir 20 dakikaya kadar ofisinde olacak. Yani böyle bir karışıklık oldu. Kusura bakmayın. Rica etsem yani oturumu terk etmezseniz sevinirim. Bir 20 dakika, 25 dakika içerisinde maksimum başlayacağız. Böyle bir sorun baş gösterdi. Kusura bakmayın lütfen. Click for the recording again. Okay. Welcome to the second week sessions of Batman University Erasmus Academic Talks series that we have been organizing for the first time this year. Today is the first talk session. Lecturer Dima Yaser from Birzeit University, Palestine, is the guest speaker of Batman University International Relations Office, and she will talk about the relation between the dream of nation, nation building, state building, and she will talk about the function of architecture in this context. The title of her talk will be "The Production of Architecture in the Light of the Dream of a State Nation." But before that, I would like to introduce our invited speaker for our participants, dear students and colleagues. Dima Yaser currently is an instructor at the Department of Architectural Engineering at Birzeit University. She received her bachelor degree in architectural engineering from Birzeit University again, and later she earned a Fulbright Award to pursue her studies, where she received her Master of Architecture from the Pennsylvania State University in the United States. And her research at the time focused on issues pertaining to architecture and the city and identity. And she teaches throughout the curriculum, including architectural design, theories of architecture, and visual communications. Her research interests are in the field of urbanism, architectural theory and design, theories of heritage and culture. Dima Yaser has national and regional experience in both architectural and urban design and community development. Dima Yaser, thank you again for accepting our invitation. And the stage is yours. You can begin.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Emra, for the introduction. And I'm glad to be here today with you. I heard about the university so much from Pauline because we both worked together on a research project. And yes, so today I will be talking about the production of architecture in light of a dreamland. A few years ago, we had a colloquium in the FRAC where we discussed, me and other colleagues, the whole notion of the dreamland from, a state of having a dreamland of land to a state of becoming a dreamland, because of the transformations and the other things, which I will brief you real quickly about it. I will just give a very quick general talk about this topic in specific, because this has been like the area of research where I and other colleagues have been actually exploring, and it's been, the hot topic at the time, but, things have been shifting. But anyway, as you know, ever since the establishment of the Palestinian National Authority in the 1994 and the establishment of the institutes of this authority in Palestine after the peace, the Oslo Peace Accords. I'm not really sure how familiar you are with the region. If anyone has any questions, I'd rather have like this kind of an informal talk where we can have, questions back and forth, and not a lecture, just
I encourage my students and participants to ask you at least a bunch of questions. Don't worry.
Please, okay. So anyway, so things have been really changing dramatically ever since then, because we've been always under the occupation of, Israel, and then previously we've always been under some sort of an external rule, whether during the Ottoman period, then, the Brits came, took over for a few years. We had the British mandate, and then the Nakba in 48, and then we became fully occupied. And then in the 60s, in 67 until a few years, we were under the Jordanian rule. But things took a different shift after the first Intifada, and they signed the agreement of Oslo in the early 90s, and then the Palestinian liberation. Important figures came to Palestine with lots of returnees who were, abroad, whether in exile or they've always, they were. displaced at the time of the Nakba, and then they were like in Tunisia, Jordan, Lebanon. Some people were able to come back with the new Palestinian National Authority. So things took a very sharp turn at the time, and things have been changing dramatically and unexpectedly. I'm talking about manifestation of these changes on the level of urban transformations and architecture, let alone yet the political and, the state, the dream of the state being liberated once, or maybe the pseudo-liberation of the Palestinians at the time, because people were celebrating the arrival of the Palestinian Authority, that we finally have a Palestinian body to rule. But, it all turned out to be a big just balloon, which turned out to be nothing at the end. So I'm not going to talk much about that, but I'm going to talk more about architecture and the representations and figures. I have a presentation, so I'm going to be sharing my screen. Hold on. Okay. You see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see. We can
okay,
see.
Great. The arrival of the authority and what happened at the time, this kind of production of the state and its institutions was very dramatic, and it had a huge impact on all the visual landscape in Palestine. The representations of the newly formed authority rendered new landscapes. The official view is now dominated by the notion of production for mass consumption. And we're going to explore this further in shortly. In an era also dominated by a laissez-faire attitude, because we will see, the transformations bit by bit. In 2007, 2008, there was a dramatic economic transitioning to a neoliberal state, which really changed dramatically the whole idea of the struggle from being, resistance and, nation building and liberating the land and the dream of the land into actually a survival mode of, investments and development, and more of an economic rest that was created in order to stabilize the society, which is also a falsified image that was told to the people, and it was sold, unfortunately, to them. In most cases, the investors, and the final word on the architecture goes back to the investor and this who has money, who owns the land and who owns these territories. If we talk about the role of architects, they are nothing but the fulfillers of the dream of an investor who owns lots of money, or a contractor and a developer. The general individualism versus collectivism discourse, pan-Arabism and regionalism of the 80s and 90s was completely overruled by a sweeping victory of fragmented developments and patchwork of eclectic architectural typologies and styles. Just to quickly, this is the agreement of the Oslo Accords, when Yasser Arafat and Ishaq Rabin, and the patronage of this whole agreement, the United States was signed. This is what actually what Palestine, unfortunately, Palestinian territories looks like. This is the occupied Palestinian territory. Here we have the West Bank. Do you see my cursor? Right, you do. Sorry. Okay, this is the West Bank, and this is Gaza Strip. Just to quickly let you know, the Oslo Accords divided the land into three main categories: A, with Palestinian surveillance; B, with military surveillance of Israel; and C, with full surveillance of Israel over the terrain, over the land. So basically, we have here the Gulf. All the dark brown is Area C, where Palestinians don't have full authority over their land at all. So anything that gets built in these regions, it's demolished if it doesn't have any paperwork from the Israelis, and usually they don't give any permits in this area because they don't want Palestinians to be developing here, except for Jericho, so which is here, and then some areas here. But this is also all dotted with more settlements. And if we look at the actual map, this is what it looks like. The darker areas are where we have settlements. These like tiny little beige, brown in the beige are the Palestinian cities and villages. Upon the arrival of the Palestinian Authority in Palestine, there was a symbol of, the creation of a state and this, Israeli-Palestinian peace. Two areas with the hotspots at first, Jericho and Gaza. So Gaza, they had built an airport, which is here. This is the image of the airport in 1998, and it fully operated as a regional airport. And in Jericho, these were like the first projects that took place. An intercontinental hotel was constructed, and a casino for gambling was also built, because this, fostered the peace relations with the Israelis at the time. Very little at that time, very little was happening in the other Palestinian cities, because when the state or institutions assumed buildings of residential buildings for their quarters, to be their quarters at the time, because they did not have time to yet build the state. But key projects were constructed. For instance, this in Bethlehem, there was a huge convention center close to Artas, to the south of Bethlehem, and it was supposed to be more of a regional convention palace, conferences, hotels, natural sciences, the science museum, bazaar that represents more like, the traditional bazaar, and so on. And then we have also the Peace Center, which was constructed in 2000 for the celebrations of the millennium, because, the birth of Jesus 2000 years ago, it was the 2000 project in Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. And other projects, which were a bit, different, because they were not constructed from a tabula rasa, but this is the Muqata'a, or the Palestinian headquarters, which is originally a Taggart fort. It was built by Charles Taggart, a British mandate architect. He built several buildings that look like this one here, made from concrete. And it was basically more of a heterotopic place for the British army and the Palestinian prisoners, because it was also a prison for all the Palestinians who, escalated any riots, demonstrations, and protests against the British mandate. And now it's in the heart of Ramallah, but when it was constructed in the 30s of the past century, it was towards the outskirts of the city, because Ramallah was originally a village. It was decreed a city during the Ottoman rule in the early 20th century, at the turn of the century, where it was decreed as a city, but yet it was a village on its own. So this place where we see, I can't see my cursor anymore, but this, as you see here, like the complex of, to the bottom left, that's the compound of the headquarters. So as upon the arrival, Yasser Arafat and the authority sort of liberated this place. And when we say liberated, it's, with quoting what they thought at the time, because it was, always a symbol of colonization, and always a symbol of oppression, because it was used by the British, then by the Israelis, and then by the Jordanians, and then again by the Israelis with sort of the civics. It became a civic center for Palestinians to go do the paperwork and everything that had to do with it. Yes, I see a hand. Mustafa, you want to ask something?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Hello, by the way.
Hello.
How are you?
Good.
Thanks a lot. I want also to ask about what was the aim of that building?
This building, at the time when it was constructed, it was a residence place for the British Army and the British officials, and it had a prison. So I did a research about this building specifically because we look at it from, the transformation of a prison into a palace. And when we look at it, it used to house all the British officials with their families, where they would have like their, private life in there, and they did not connect with the rest of the people. Unlike the French, when we talk about the occupation, the British and the French, sort of in Palestine specifically, they kept this remote distance relationship with the people, and it did have it did protect the land for the Israeli occupation, because later on, a lot of the land that was designated as natural reserve areas were given to the Israelis, where they built settlements, colonial settlements on top of these mountains. But anyway, this is the place where they would live with their families, and they would also have prisoners living here. And then later on, it still stayed as an official headquarters for the occupier, whoever it was at that time. And it was still a prison for Palestinians, no matter who the occupier was, because of those the protesters, anyone who demonstrated or who rejected any of the decrees that were given. So they were political prisoners, basically, here.
So as far as I stand, you can join that building, or what?
Mustafa, please, if you like, let's wait for the for our speaker to complete her presentation. In question and answer session, I will give you a speech, give you a word to talk. Okay, to ask your question.
Okay. But before I move on to the next slide, the top image where you can see a tank, this was in 2002, because Arafat, it was a symbol for all Palestinians. He was very controversial, but all Palestinians somehow saw him as the leader, So he based his new headquarters in this building. For Palestinians at the time, they celebrated this because it was the liberation of the atrocity of the colonizers, and finally the Palestinians took over. But it was sieged. He was sieged in the building before he was, assassinated, and it was bombed a few times. And all the Palestinians were able to go there to, give support. And even when he died, they had all the people gathered in this spot. The image on the right is the new renovation of this site. So before that, it was connected to the street level. People were still able to go in, although it looked really hideous but the symbol of architecture was, very, the architecture of the occupier. But this was like somehow rendered with the stone that is, very somehow connected to the Palestinians, because we always have the stone in our buildings, the image of the stone, the identity, and so on. But unfortunately, there was a big island in the middle, as you see, with the green, the buffer zone that created this connection with the people, and then it became more of like an area. And another museum was built. No, I don't have an image of it here, but another museum was built by Ja'far Tuqan, who's one of the famous Palestinian Jordanian architects in the region, and a mosque after the death of Arafat at the time. These are images of just like random buildings, apartment buildings that were used by the Palestinian Authority upon their arrival for the ministries, which was this transitioning, until they had their own ministries constructed by the architects. So what happened was a lot of people who owned land and money rushed to Ramallah and the city centers like Nablus and Hebron to build such buildings, because they fulfilled, they could, any apartment building can be designed in a way, the interior of it, to house the ministry, any office building. Unfortunately, this is too problematic, because then all of the buildings started to, just emerge out of nowhere in the region. This is an image just to show you quickly what happened. An image of Al-Manara. It's the city center of Ramallah. Basically, I will be talking more about Ramallah because this is where the area of research and where I live, actually. This is one of the first towers to be built on the bottom left. One of the towers, it's called Palestine Tower. We have regulations, building regulations, ever since the British mandate were here, because of setbacks, garden city type of setbacks that were not actually revised after the change. This change happens everywhere because of new lifestyles and stuff. But yet, because we were under occupation, things were different the way they were led, because there was communal and communal committees that would actually somehow administer, and they were like more of a collective effort. After the arrival of the Palestinian Authority, it became more of an individualized community where people who had, the power, the means and power to execute whatever they want, they would. So this kind of tower emerged like out of nowhere. It does not, it's not compliant with any of the regulations, but he had a special permit from Yasser Arafat to build 25 towers because he was promised an office at the top, which is a revolving place. But this is one of the important streets in Ramallah. It's called the Irsal Street, which means that the radio street. And we had the first transition towers of the BBC. So this is where you had the first tower of the BBC radio, and it was, our channel out to the world where we had this connection. And they were like, they go back all the way to the first half of the 20th century, and they're important, but it's just, to some people, it's just some iron that is not important, and let's get rid of it and build some ugly buildings instead. This is the Manara. This is the image of Al-Manara. This is how it looked like. This is actually the new center that emerged in the 30s, 40s, and 50s of the past century. The old town of Ramallah is actually further down to the south. But, with a lot of people from Ramallah immigrating to the United States of America and a lot of the money coming back, a new center started to emerge and new building types. So a lot of the people somehow moved out of the old town and lived in houses that were more modern, the square with a pitched roof, typical of the region, somehow the Levant. We can see this kind of architecture in the region. And they had more like of a villa type with a garden instead of, the clusters that they used to live in. So this is what the first shift in Ramallah, when people left the old town and moved to the new center, which was more modern. And as you see, cars and stuff. But then it continued to change. We had the bank in the center, and it's a joint area between two cities, Al-Bira and Ramallah. So it's like the highly commercialized area of the Ramallah district. And yes, this is what it used to. This is the Irsal Street. This is what used to look like, and now this is what looks like at the bottom. This is this is the clock tower, but it's not the clock tower like the clocks that were installed in the public spaces during the Ottoman, because we have in Jaffa, Nablus, a few places, a few cities in Palestine, they had the clock tower that was installed during the celebration, the anniversary of the Sultan. We still have them, but in this, it was mimicking, actually, it was more of the modern impact of, these towers elsewhere. But slowly and surely, it started to to change and shift into more of, the banking sector started to boom. A lot of these commercial buildings boomed. When we look at these, also the cinema houses, which were very important in the 50s and 60s of the past century, because they represented like the political space where people would express, meet and talk, more of a political saloon. They would discuss, importance of, cinema and its effect. And it was happening elsewhere in the region. Unfortunately, because of, this kind of economic and even shifting in the vision from the state to a dreamland, more of, the more malls were installed and built in these buildings and replaced. And a lot of these buildings, this was to be preserved, and it was meant to be, they had to preserve all the elevations. However, during the construction, because, the contractor can do whatever they want, so they still dug more and more and more until the facades, some of them fell apart. So we see down a little bit of these, facades remaining, but then a hideous all glass shopping center was installed instead. This is another example where we have this, like the cinema. Dunya was one of the most important. Unfortunately, I don't know why I can't use my cursor, but anyway, this was replaced by a huge also commercial building. This happens, I understand this happens in so many places because, of the economic and financial transformations and changes happening, the IMF, the impact of the World Bank, and the new lifestyles. This is the image of Ramallah Old Town. This is what it used to look like during the, just less than 100 years ago. This is important if we look at these and even the renditions and the representations of land for Palestinian artists. It was important because land is what we have, and the struggle was over the land. So eventually the struggle has shifted from the land to just some sort of a neoliberal approach. And as you speak to these Palestinian artists, Nabil Anani and Siman Mansour, one of the very important, they would always, they always have in their paintings, the olive groves, the land, the old buildings. And they used to tell us that they would take out any modern building out of these images because they wanted to preserve the image of the land that we were aspiring to have. This is the land that we wanted as Palestinians. So from, the dream of a land to dreamland, which is more like, an amusement park. And this is what's happening somehow. This is Salam Fayyad in 2007. He was the prime minister. And during his administration, things took a different approach, because until 2007 still people were talking about resistance and forms of resistance. People were not in debt to the bank. They couldn't take any loans, and they still managed their communal living the way they used to during that 10 years of the establishment of the Palestinian Authority. But afterwards there was an approach towards neoliberalism as the new form of resistance and dealing with the struggle. And ever since then, people were all in debt. They were all in debt to the banks. They all had loans. They all dreamed of an apartment. They all dreamed of to own a car. And then all of a sudden, a lot of projects and investments, surplus capital started to come from the Gulf region. And we'll talk about one of the examples. But this is like the Irsal. When we talked about the radio area, this is like a project by also a Saudi-funded firm. Beautiful images of similar in Jordan, Lebanon, like the Solidaire sort of developments where you have all new areas emerging. These are some of the buildings that were constructed. Of course, the images that were, portrayed are completely different because of the shortage of lots of financing and lots of issues with the whole idea of post-Oslo era, because people thought that we will have a state at some point and we will have the institution and so on. But this kind of dispersed, no man no, anyway. This is like also another, building of the monetary authority, the Palestinian monetary authority, which is very important in Palestine because they, they're in charge of all of the banking sectors, and this is like sort of the dispersed authority into different institutions, but this was built more like a monstrous building dominating the landscape, which was all green. One of the this project were constructed on a public land, which used to be a forest. And I remember when it was a forest because still I was doing my bachelor's at the university, and none of these projects were there. But then it was somehow privatized by the authority because it was sold to the private sector. And this kind of building architecture replaced a beautiful forest, unfortunately. This is more examples of the headquarters, because all of the headquarters, the Palestinian headquarters or the Tegrit forts, which used to be the British headquarters, were remodeled and renovated to become more, symbolizing the state, but with similar actually symbols of, the tower that was used during the occupation and is still used by the occupation, where everywhere you go and close to a checkpoint or closer to the apartheid wall, you will see such towers that are, around, and they dot the landscape. And here you see it, but, it's cladded with stone, so as to make it more, relatable to the Palestinians, unfortunately. You see here the eclecticism of, the nostalgia for an architecture that represents us, unfortunately. So we have weird arches, coming from here and there. This is the authority. This is the headquarters, Al-Muqata'a. And I remember I interviewed a prisoner who used to live here, and he was heartbroken to see the transformation, because he said this somehow cleans away all the blood that was shed by Palestinians. Was like, this kind of devoiding the place of its original meaning, and it's the oppression that people faced at the time. This is another. The square thing is the memorial burial place of Yasser Arafat, and close to it. This is just behind this building. This huge building. This is just right behind it. These are other examples of ministries. This is, for instance, the Ministry of Exterior Affairs. This is the Ministry of Housing and Public Works. This is the one on the lower. This is the Education Ministry. This is the Presidential Palace. Also, that it was also built on a site that was dedicated for a hospital for children, unfortunately. But privatization of authorities and the power they have and the means they have, so it was completely replaced by palace, that comes from probably Granada or from us. We were looking at whoever was looking, not us as architects, but whoever was looking for an identity tried to get this identity from other places which somehow speak the same tradition as ours, which is completely not true. But anyway, it was built as a presidential palace, but due to the security measures, it failed as a presidential palace and now was transformed into a public library. Lots of such developments because of, this kind of neoliberal era, just lots of things started to be built around. What's interesting about this, I don't know if anyone reads Arabic, but it says that land for sale in Palestine. And this was one of the scariest things we've seen, because, this commodification of land is scary for Palestinians, because land is not a commodity that can be sold online. And unfortunately, it did become a commodity because it's where people are investing now. My father is a land appraiser and a surveyor, and he says that the prices of land skyrocketed during the past 15 years. Land was all the Palestinian had. you know, because we were farmers, we were peasants, we would, you know, cultivate the land, was their own. But a lot of scholars, they go back to the land reform plan during the Ottoman period of 1800s, you know, and 1850s. There was a change in the taxation and change in the categories of the land, categorization and classification of the land, sort of, you know, privatization of ownership instead of the collection and the common, what is common, and so on. So you would see a lot of these that people were celebrating, you know, the tabu, which means, you know, you can own the land, and you know, it's just it started to happen everywhere. Lots of developments such as this, gated communities, villas, gated areas designated for, you know, the upper class. Ramallah used to be, I would say, in Palestine in general, you didn't have this discrepancy between the social classes, but ever since the establishment of these new institutions and this new new vision, unfortunately, we started to notice that people were looking for, you know, more special areas for them. So you would see gated areas, and you would see that, you know, the urbanization of rural areas, the shifting rural areas, you know, the city wannabe sort of attitude started to emerge in all of the villages. So you would see such buildings all over, although these are all villages which depended highly on you know, cultivation of land. But unfortunately, because land became so expensive, they would sell it and, you know, just sit around and spend the money. They have the money now. This is what a master plan of the area would look like. We have a unfortunately, because of also the classification of land and where Palestinians can build. This is Ramallah, and close to it are villages of Surda, Abu Kash, and Birzeit. And as you can see, this whole development of one monolithic master plan emerged because there's the scarcity of land, and the new approach and the developers, and, you know, the lack of vision, and unfortunately the commodification of land just created such a thing. Lastly, I think I still have time. Lastly, I want to talk about is Rawabi, which is a new city that was built from scratch, and it has lots of interesting stories inside the stories. So it's basically surplus money from the Gulf region came to Palestine, especially from Qatar. And one of the most important investors in Palestine is Bashar Masri. So there's an insider joke that says, you know, Palestine is now is one of the corporates of Bashar Masri, because he's like a businessman and he's filthy rich, and he owns like most of the banks and even cities now in Palestine. But this is one of the interesting posts in Washington Post. It says that the newest city in the wannabe state of Palestine, hold on, I can see. The developer Bashar Masri is putting the finishing touches on his mall, not just any mall. It's a huge mall. It's a shopping experience, an outdoor experience with, you know, designer bags and international brands here and there. But, you know, interesting enough that Masri says that Palestinians cannot get permission to spend their money in Israeli malls, not let them shop here. This is how you build a state. And this is bullcrap, unfortunately. You know, this is not how you build a state. But anyhow, this is how he saw building a state, and this is how so many people see the state. So this is Rawabi, constructed on the lands of between villages, you know, and he just built this monstrous stone buildings. It's actually, it has an amphitheater, it has a shopping area, and so on. This is on a different level. The cultural sector tried to assume a different position on what a state is, because they tell a different story, and they felt the responsibility that, you know, we have to tell. But it's also controversial. This is the Palestinian Museum just close to us in Birzeit. it's not the National Museum, but it's the Palestinian Museum, built on a nice landscape. They won the Aga Khan for the landscape. It was designed by Irish architects, and billions of money was spent on it. And it's a very controversial place. The A.M. Qattan Foundation was recently also built in Ramallah, and also designed by Seville-based architects, Spanish architects. It overlooks the Al-Tire, which is which used to be an upscale neighborhood in Ramallah. So it's still around the Qattan. You see that, you have like some of the beautiful villas and beautiful buildings of the upper side, upper class of Hada. Very interesting also, the garden says, is that, an imposing hillside citadel, because it's more of a citadel. It lies on a hilltop and it's away from the people, similar to the museum, which is also in the village of Birzeit, which is not close to the public. These became more of like, the private sector, the elite, the intellectual elite of Palestine, where you spend like billions of money on a building that is, enjoyed by a few. So it's the few for the few. But it just, aims to provide, was as the put in the Guardian, because they put a huge article on it. It's a 16.1 billion pound investment in Ramallah, and these are like some images of it. Yeah. So basically, just to quickly wrap up, so this is like the transformation, the transitioning of what we dreamt of as a land and our ownership of a land, which later on became more of a dreamland. So.
Dear speaker, Dima Yaser, thank you very much for this promising and stimulating presentation. And I'm sure that most of our participants and dear students are all, at least most of them, are interested in this topic, as a closer geography, or the history of feeling a historical link between the two countries, two nations, let's say. So let me ask to dear participants, Yusuf Hocam or the other
yes.
participants.
First of all, Ms. Yaser, warmly welcome to our program. I want to introduce myself, Head of International Relations Office. First of all, my question, yes, I know that our time is very limited. So my question shortly, especially Palestine and Israel have very long process problems. Yes, now if you look at prison, especially Israel and Palestine, what do you think about it? Especially buildings give any means to us?
The prison, you mean? Is it correct?
Yes, prison buildings, especially. Did you have any study relating the prison?
The prison in general, you mean? We do have colleagues who have worked on prisons, and especially forensic architecture, in the sense that they would interview a lot of former prisoners and understand the relationship of space and cognition, because the complete isolated areas in Palestinian areas, a lot of them, so they're close. Like we have one of the prisons here, it's close to Bitunia, and it's completely confined, and you're not allowed to go in unless you have a prisoner, you have a family member that you go to. One of my students actually did a project on one of these prisoners, of how to decolonize these practices of prisons, and these constructs, which is very controversial, whether if, we're talking about decolonization and the complete liberation of Palestine and the region, then we talk about these constructs that are no longer, that they've become obsolete, supposedly. So this is the hypothesis of the student. But then, you know, you have a huge memory of agony and pain that you wash away. So it was like very interesting to see how the students had to deal with it. But I did not myself work on prisons, but if you're interested in that field, to know more about it, I can connect you with one of my colleagues who did a course with students about reconstructing the images of these and the spaces, 3D spaces and virtual spaces of these prisons in Palestine. And I think it was a joint project with Al-Qattan Foundation. So if there's anything, I can connect you with her.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Dr. Yusuf Çınar. What else? Any other question? Mustafa, it's your turn. You may ask whatever you want. By the way, Mustafa is our Egyptian student. He's from Egypt. Yeah. So he's really interested, and he just before the session he showed, he let me know about his interest. So Mustafa, if you are still present online, please go ahead.
Yeah, also we love Palestinian people. We are, we are one person, as our teacher know that. So my question is about the Masadda. I have heard about that also in Palestine.
Could you repeat again?
Yeah, Masadda.
Masadda?
The prison or headquarters? Headquarters.
Not prison in Palestine. I was wondering about it. It was a lake, and so do you know about it?
Masada?
Masadda.
It's a kind of lake, right?
Yeah, it was a lake, but now...
Where about exactly?
Yeah, now it's something like mountains, and it's empty. There is no lake now.
Yeah, yes, because of a lot of the lakes there, they were dried by Israelis, and because they used the land as fertile. We have a huge issue on water and natural resources. You know, with the agreement of Oslo, Palestinians don't own anything on the land or underground. So we cannot actually have, anything up or down. We cannot have like wells. We cannot have access to the rainwater. It's all collected by the Israelis, and it's all, a lot of the valleys have been diverted in a way that it's all collected by the Israelis. So this is another issue we have, and it's huge. The lakes, there's a lake up north, it was the whole water was diverted to the settlements and colonial settlements up in the north, and it dried completely because there was no, water coming from the river. But I'm not sure if I know what you're talking about. If you can write down the name of the lake.
Of course, here it is. I think it's like that.
Okay, let me check it.
Masada.
As far as I remember.
Yes. Okay. It's now a park.
Yeah.
Yes, it's close to the Dead Sea area, because a lot of that that's another story. The Dead Sea is yet another story of what's happening there. Because I just was wondering.
Yeah,
what were you?
From which aspect are you wondering?
Yes, what aspect were you wondering about? Like,
it's also an architecture, I think.
Okay, but in what way?
Sorry?
In what way?
In what way? It's because it's related with Palestine. That's all.
Yes. I fully understand. But yeah, I haven't done any research about Masada. But a lot are like Masada, but we're talking about the Dead Sea area because a lot of the land was for like minerals excavations, salt, and had a lot of the areas are drying out. Yeah, it's immense what's happening in there. So yeah, it's just sad to see all these natural resources and all these being because we don't own them. We don't have any authority whatsoever over these lands.
May the God bless you and all people in Palestine, and I appreciate you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mustafa.
Another question?
I have a question too.
Eylül or
Yes.
Mahabat, who wants to talk?
I want to talk.
Okay, firstly Mahabat, then Eylül. Please ask your questions by one by one, please.
Okay. Hello, first thanks for this beneficial lecture. My name is Muhabbet. I study at the Department of English Language and Literature in Birzeit University. I have a question, but before asking my question, I wanted to share something that I realized in abroad. Now I'm in Poland because I visited different city and even country, and the thing that I realized is that every city or country has an old town, like you said, even in the capital of country too. And there are many differences between city hall, city square, and old towns about architecture. Like in Old Town, between amazing structure and building, you can feel the nostalgia. I mean, you can feel like you are in past. You can get some ideas about their culture, their tradition, and like that. And when I compare their architectural structures, I see many differences, especially with my own country. Because while some countries try to be modern about architecture, the others try to keep their historical structure. So, keep us short. I want to ask, how can a country or nation produce its architecture while preserving its historical structure? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a huge question. You know, it's a huge question. This is what architects have been trying to answer for decades and decades and decades. But I would say it's important to understand that, you know, we live in an era which sometimes it's inevitable. You know, you cannot just change reality, and this is happening everywhere. And as we know now, cities are assuming new important roles other than, you know, just country and, you know, identity. So we all sometimes try to identify either as, you know, Arabs or like, you know, the region, or maybe sometimes we all identify as human. So it's very interesting, this whole concept of identity and going back and, you know, the nostalgia, and what kind of architecture do we expect? What kind of architecture do we produce? It's not, sometimes it's not about the symbol itself. It's about actually the community, the common, the feeling of that this belongs to the people. It's not, you know, the agency of the people is what's important. It's also important to understand that these old places are not just museum-like places. This is a struggle that we also face, because a lot of people want to preserve and maintain old towns as if they're timeless. And, you know, they can just be like only, you know, for artist residencies, museums, and they're not active. Unfortunately, this is sad because it's actually killing the old towns. And you see there's a huge rupture always in so many places between the old towns and the new developments. And this is in Palestine very evident if you look at it, because you see the old town in, you know, in one place, and then you see everything else new moving away from the old town. So the old town becomes a ghost town. They did try to have revitalization plans and stuff for that. But just going back to the main question is the production of architecture and the agency of the people, you know, and who really dictates what.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your response, but you say something about identity, so I have one more question, and you can be sure it will be it's about the settler colonialism. As you know, in American literature, we can encounter with two parts, like settlers and migrants. Migrants accepted all the things about a nation, a country, like language, tradition, culture, and even architecture too. But settlers on the name, they were the owner. They used their how can I say, their hegemonic power, and they displace the natives from their land. Like in the literature, we can realize about the displacement of Native Americans. So I wanted to ask you, do you think architecture has an effect on identity? I mean, do you think architecture represents the identity of a society, of a country, or a nation?
Very interesting question, because I did my thesis in the States. When I did my thesis, I was talking the whole time about architecture and identity, and Ramallah's changing identity. But you have two questions which are a bit different. So when we talk about identity and people, it's one thing, and when you talk about a settler colonial discourse, it's another thing. What happened as I mentioned earlier, Helene Tan and I are working on a joint research about one of the very interesting endeavors of Musa Al-Alami, who constructed a modernist pedagogical center for refugees. But as we started to, understand more about the settings of and these kind of farms, educational farms, we went back to the concept of the kibbutz. And, we had people coming, which were from socialist Europe. They were basically, it's a socialist ideology that came from Eastern Europe. And it somehow represented the thought of people at the time. Very similar to other, socialist endeavors to construct these communities which are productive and yet collective and common, and, all these things that are socialist. But then we tracked down the changes that happened, and we saw that also two things happened when people were displaced in the 48, because my grandmother was displaced from Ramle, and they had houses, built with stone, the typical traditional architecture. A lot of people came and, lived in their house. Israelis came, Jews came in, lived in her house, and she was expelled, and she had to move to Ramallah. Unfortunately, to Ramallah with her family. In other places, like Matalan Tel Aviv, Yafo, you have two cities. You have Yafa and you have Tel Aviv. You have the modernist part, which was completely demolished during the Ottoman period. During, the arrival of the Israelis, the establishment of the Israeli state was completely demolished, which was, a new modernist town that was constructed by Palestinians. But then Palestinians were asked to build a new city for the Israelis, which was planned completely by modernist planners and urban planners, which turned out to be Tel Aviv, the white city. And it's a very controversial also architecturally, but I'm not going down there because it takes us to other places. So I read in one article that people had two approaches when the Jews came to Palestine. The first, they wanted to assimilate with the culture, with the tradition. So they lived in the places of displaced Palestinians that were kicked out of their houses. The other, they wanted nothing to do with this kind of old tradition, and they built new buildings, as you see demonstrated in Tel Aviv. And you have two polarities in Israel. You have the Jerusalem people who are more, religious and heritage and Orthodox and traditionalists, and then you have the people who live in Tel Aviv, which is completely, the opposite of that. So it also represents the ideology of people. Not only do we talk about, an identity, but it's also important to keep this in mind, that what is an identity when we're talking about a settler colonial context,
Thank you very much, Dima Yaser and Muhabbat. Another question?
I have a question. No, Habib.
But now it's Eylül's turn, maybe later on. Habib.
Okay.
Right.
Sorry.
First, thanks for this impressive presentation. My question is, if Palestine were not under the mandate, if there were no factors that changed the architecture, would the architecture preserve its originality? Because, there is a globalization that affects the world, and every country is affected by it. So would Palestine be affected by globalization?
Of course, yes. it would be different. It would be like more like, you know, Jordan, Lebanon, maybe the Gulf, you know, because we don't have people coming. It's not easy for you to get a visa to come to Palestine because you have to have a permission from Israel for you to come. So if you can send like the surplus capital, you might as well send the people to come along with it. So it will be more like, you know, we have a seashore. It's definitely an interesting spot for investors and developers amidst this globalization sort of economy, and the development of cities that are similar to other places. You know, we're talking, aside from the context here, if you look at cities, they've become, you know, very similar, and they're haunted with sameness. You know, if you go to Jordan, Amman, for instance, because it's the city-state, you see like the downtown of Amman, which is similar to like other places in the Solidate in Lebanon, and similar to places in Cairo, similar to places maybe in Dubai, yet we don't have the infrastructure of Dubai or the money of Dubai. But this kind of effect is happening because this is the, you know, the global economy that's affecting everyone. It's the IMF, it's the World Bank, it's all these, you know, big controllers of the game. So yeah, it would probably be part of this whole globalization effect. And it's happening, but at a smaller scale. You know, if you looked at it, we do have these effects, the ripple effects of what's happening in the world.
Thank you. Habib?
Yeah, hi, everyone. Hi everyone. I'm Habib from English Language Literature Department at Batman University. I'm a second class student. So first of all, thank you for your nice presentation. And my question is about Masjid Al-Aqsa, about its architecture, who built it, and you know, it occupied by many forces during the history. So about the role of Salahuddin Ayyubi al-Kurdi in the past. So my question is about the architecture and the building of Masjid Al-Aqsa. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. This is a very historical question, and I have to actually, to make it correct, I have to look it up. Just give me a second. You know, it was built in the 7th, 8th century, and it's early Islamic style. What else? It's an Umayyad palace. Hold on. You have a lot of information about it. I'm sorry, but I'm not really, you know, I know the history of it in general, but I'm not like very specifically aware of all these, but you can find them online. I'm sorry.
Okay, don't worry, Habib. We will talk about it during our medieval or Renaissance courses.
Okay. I know, just it was like
it's not a truly relevant question to our session, but as I told you, most of our students are really interested in asking you a lot of questions.
I'm sorry, I couldn't answer the question, but you know.
No problem. It's not a truly relevant question to our topic. In fact, I noted lots of details, lots of questions in relation to this title, because I am a doctor, lecturer and doctor of English department, and my research interests are mostly on memory, ideology, Foucault, you know, space. It will take lots of time, but unfortunately we have another session with Professor Yesko. But I just want to ask a short question. Is there any application? Of course, there are, but I'm not sure about the details. Is there any related projects or studies for the production of post-memory? You know, according to Pierre Nora, during the time of after modernity, it's not easy to reconstruct a historical aura environment for the following generations. So as Marion Hirsch claimed at the end of 20th century. There is a fact of post-memory in order to replace, make up for the gap between the generations, because there's a generational gap because of the fragmentations in past. Is there any specific projects in relation to reproducing, in order to reproduce the Palestinian national or collective memory in this sense?
Very, very interesting thing. And I think it would be great if we can also talk maybe later, because this is very interesting. Because of reconstruction, memory, collectivity, and what constitutes identity as a collective. But one of the things that were claimed to be revival of this collectivity is, the rehabilitation projects of all towns. But, the way it was done, it was very technical in the sense that it does not really represent what it meant at the time, and because of the rupture, because things happen suddenly in Palestine, these kind of developments happened very fast in like 20 years. So we were completely disconnected with all of this historical framework that you're talking, and the whole collectivity. But for instance, one of the projects we talked about, the collectivity and the collective memory, is the reconstruction of all of the headquarters, like the Muqata'a, the British headquarters, which were completely transformed from being a prison into Palestinian headquarters. But they are very controversial and very highly, critical and criticized by the masses, because, they think there's a huge distance between what is being reconstructed and what we want to preserve from our memory as people, and as users. And but it's a
let it just be a teaser for our following discussions maybe later on.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your participation. We are really honored to host you here. If you have another chance, we would like to be pleased to host you here in Batman, in the southeastern part of Turkey. We are really glad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Yusuf Hocam, the head of the International Relations Office, would you like to add something else?
Yes. Also, I am conducting conflict management lesson. So your master thesis, architecture and the city Ramallah's changing identities, many times I suggested, so very good study in my opinion, and especially I am listening your opinion relating to identities and architecture. So we learned that architecture like a people, so every term can affect. So it is very pleasure for me to listen you. Thank you very much. I would like to thank also Pelin Hoca and Emrah Hoca. Inshallah, we will meet again. Thank you.
Yes, hopefully we have to work on it to make it happen.
Yes, we will be glad. Thank you very much, Dima Yaser. Take care of yourself, and please send our greets to your people.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Teşekkürler.
Bye-bye. Şükran. Arkadaşlar, ikinci oturumun linkini hemen buradan paylaşıyorum. Lütfen bu katılım kimliğiyle hemen girelim. 2 dakikaya hemen açıyorum. Burayı kapatıyorum şu anda.